at the end of the day, when it comes to business, we have so many things, and there's so many things going on that if you can capture and document the stuff that you repeat over and over again, it just frees you up to do the other fun stuff and be creative and all of that. So that's where at the end of the day, the value comes for, me and my team.
Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm Chris Ronzio, founder and CEO of Trainual, and this is Organized Chaos. As always, we're taking a page from a different leader's playbook so you can put it in yours as you build your own. And today, you're going to hear from Lisa González. This is almost a little meta because her playbook or her book is called Process: How Discipline and Consistency Will Set You and Your Business Free. Like mine, hers is all about creating a playbook for your business. And so a page from Lisa's playbook is sort of a book about playbooks, like my book about playbooks. So this one's fun. You're going to like this. If you like anything about process and operations, just hearing Lisa's story, how she grew up in an entrepreneurial family, how she became kind of the EOS implementer that she is, how she got involved with the community and wrote this book, co-authored this book, is just a fun story. And we loved talking about it and having this banter around process. So check this out. Like I said, she's been an EOS implementer, and after applying all of those principles in her companies and intersecting with Gino Wickman and reading Traction, EOS had just made such a profound impact on her business that she wanted to share her expertise and process with other growth-minded companies. So today she's a speaker, she's an author, she's a process fanatic, and she's, like I mentioned, the co-author of this book, Process. So dive in, dig in, take some notes, and I hope it helps you better document your processes. Hey everyone, welcome back to Organized Chaos. I'm your host, Chris Ronzio, and today I'm really excited to have on a fellow author, Lisa González. Hey Lisa.
Hi Chris, it's wonderful to see you again.
Great to see you again. So it's been a little while since we chatted, but of course, we're here to talk about your new book, Process: How Discipline and Consistency Will Set You and Your Business Free. I love that title.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And you were wonderful to spend some time with me when we were writing the book and kind of share some of your experiences. So I'm glad to reconnect now that the book has been written and is out.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll get into the book. We'll spend a lot of time on this. It's new from the Traction Library by EOS Worldwide, and you wrote it with Mike Payton over there. And so there is just tons of wisdom and nuggets in this book. And I want to come back to that. But before we do, let's set the entrepreneurial stage here. I want to hear about your journey and really when you started to realize the benefits of process and documentation. So take us back. Where does it all start?
So it starts actually in my childhood. I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. I would say I grew up in Southern California, and I'd say my family started probably 10 different businesses as I was growing up. And so they had 10 businesses and in all different industries, whether it was like in product sales or in services. And along the way, 10 businesses, 4 kids, and they had zero process. So as a result, we had a lot of chaos. I've shared that I remember kind of the tension at the family table sometimes when either products weren't going out on time or files weren't organized or whatever it was, or even cash flow issues, right? And so early on when I was I'd say a young teen, I'd help my family with, working weekends and many, many summers, just trying to support our businesses and contribute how I can, whether, just and initially understanding like there's this opportunity here. I don't think I articulated it like that at the time, but to, become a little more systemized, whether it was, with how we filed or timelines or just making lists of everything. And that's where it all started.
Do you think you've always been an organized person? Would you classify yourself that way?
I think is it nature, nurture? I don't know. I think so. And, I'm sure there's an author, Marie Kondo, who wrote The Magic Art of Tidying Up or something great like that.
Yeah.
And she shares in her book, and I could hear in her book, this is probably 15 years ago, like the background story, like this family kind of energy going on that made her who she was. And she even acknowledged it later that, her diving into other people's processes wasn't really appropriate. And so I think it's my nature. I think I try to rein it in now and understand, where it's appropriate and where it's not. And so, but that's where it started, certainly. And then as I became an adult, I ended up going to college. I went to law school, and I ended up working with other businesses. I was an employment defense lawyer. I was doing business law. And along the way, someone in my family, I got married to an entrepreneur. And you would think I would have run from, the entrepreneurial world at that point, but instead I joined a startup that he had with a vision of, is in the residential remodel space with a vision of having offices across the country and becoming one of the largest residential remodelers in the country. And so as we did that, the organization grew, and we grew in fits and starts. We were members of EO and YPO, and we learned some great stuff along the way. And I knew that, and I think along the way I learned about process and documenting processes. And so, for better or for worse, I single-handedly decided I'm going to document all the processes in this company. And I didn't, red flag, because I didn't involve the leadership team. I spent nights and weekends doing it, and eventually presented it to the leadership team. And it was this ridiculous, over-detailed, unmanageable, thick binder full of processes that, much to my surprise, the leadership team didn't, put me on their shoulders or name a street after me. It just felt,
Yeah.
they didn't say no hugs, nothing. It just fell flat. And so, and even I eventually forgot about it. It ended up just in a dusty notebook behind my desk. And so, which even that, is behind my desk, so not even accessible. So every piece of how I did it was wrong. And we continued on our way. And then we ended up opening an office across the country without processes. And it just hit us so hard financially, where, we ended up losing $1 million and taking out loans on all of our 401ks and everything. And so then the whole leadership team became invested in maybe there's a better way to become a little more systemized as an organization. And I understood the value of getting people involved. And so, around that same time, we got a copy of the book, Traction, which describes how to document your processes. And I went straight to the back and started doing it. And with the help of the leadership team, and it made all the difference. So that's the journey of, up to recent history.
Well, I can see how $1 million mistake there, $1 million lesson would really ingrain this in your DNA. So that makes
you would hope,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So it's funny that you grew up in an entrepreneurial family around all the chaos, because I grew up more in a corporate family. My dad was in business, and he traveled a lot. But anytime I got to go to his office, I would see how professional everything felt. And so by contrast, when I started my own business or started seeing other ones, I thought that's the way business has to work. It has to be structured and organized, and so it's so unique. And opposite of that, my wife's father had a business, and it was a disaster. It was just stuff everywhere, and I couldn't tolerate that. So
I think your wife and I have a lot in common there. That's what it looked like for me.
And then also the remodeling business. I've often told people that I feel like I'm good at remodeling because I see things and put structure to them, and I like to organize chaos, right? So it's funny that you gravitated toward that as well. So maybe there's a hidden, group of us process people that should be just remodelers.
I think absolutely, and I think maybe there's a DNA test or something we need to do and see what's the common chromosome in us. Because absolutely, and yeah, if you come to my house, I try not to be crazy, but I think from the outside, or ask my kids, I'll say I'm crazy. I try to stay organized. I think it helps a mental state for me. But at the end of the day, when it comes to business, we have so many things, and there's so many things going on that if you can capture, and document the stuff that you repeat over and over again, it just frees you up to do the other fun stuff and be creative and all of that. So that's where at the end of the day, the value comes for, me and my teams.
Preach. All right. So you joined up with EOS in a way, and I want to talk about that. If people that are listening don't know, the book Traction by Gino Wickman, he's been on the podcast a couple times, and great. EOS Worldwide is Entrepreneurial Operating System. Am I getting the acronym right?
Absolutely.
So you read the book, and how did EOS kind of become part of your world?
Absolutely. So someone in YPO, which is a young professionals organization, and if you're a new entrepreneur or a successful entrepreneur and don't know about it, it's really one of the first places I recommend people go, that or EO, and just look it up online and you can find it. But it's a peer support group for entrepreneurs. And so we were a member of YPO, and the visionary in the company, someone had handed him a copy of Traction, and he just turned around and handed it to me. We implemented it in the company. I read a ton of business books, and I never devoured a book like I did that book, where, Post-it notes and earmarked and I mean, everything. And so we implemented in the organization. We ended up opening up other markets in, Illinois and Minnesota. And because of EOS, we were able to scale in an appropriate way where we had leadership teams in all the markets. We had consistent profitability, consistent revenue, and just had more fun. And so I was able to transition out. I knew the impact it had made on our own lives. And I wanted to share with other people. So I went out, I got trained and became a part of the EOS community as a EOS implementer.
And I think it's an amazing community. Same with me. When I read that book, I couldn't put it down. Because it's so practical, it's so actionable. And I think that's why it's so recommended and millions of people have read the book. So great book for anyone that's listening. But let's get into your book, which is, one of the family there. So again, Process is the name of the book. You wrote the book with Mike Payton, who goes by Payton. We were just talking about him. He's another sought after EOS implementer and runs an EOS podcast. So how did the collaboration between the two of you come about?
So I'd heard through the grapevine that EOS was looking for a co-author with Mike Payton. I reached out to Payton, which I call him. So Payton is the former visionary for EOS. And yes, he's an implementer as well. And we're like super awesome friends and colleagues now, of course, over the course of 2 years of writing a book together. And I was selected to join him in writing the book. And we spent, part of COVID, again, nights and weekends, because we both had very busy EOS practices. But, we knew that the driver was that process had not been explained in a way that had appealed to entrepreneurs and their leadership teams. And so, it was very complex, not complex, but there's other systems, whether it's Lean and Six Sigma, but process is, we wanted to make it a way that's tangible and accessible and simple for teams that are always growing and moving. And we knew that it had to be different. And so we took the principles that Gino Wickman had laid out in the original book, Traction, and really share, and the book shares with companies how to implement it in their own organizations.
Okay, so last time we talked, it was around the time I was working on my book. Mine hadn't come out yet. And we both kind of were approaching this same problem. And I think it's interesting, as I read yours, the similarities between the two books on, trying to first debunk the myths and why should you document? Why is this important for the business? So I like how you put it. You said that there's 3 common myths around process. So can we unpack those a little bit?
Absolutely. So sometimes for those teams that dive into documenting their processes, there's a step that we identify that needs to happen first, which is just kind of a mental mind shift that needs to happen. And so the importance of committing as a leadership team. And often the book is written for the visionaries, so that for the founders of these organizations. I know that people that are operational, like they when they read this, they just, amen, like yes, yes, yes. And so it's great, but we're not necessarily trying to preach to the choir. We're trying to have entrepreneurs understand that, their visceral resistance to process is not well placed. And so the 3 myths that we address, the resistance falls in one of these 3 categories. The first category is this belief that me as an entrepreneur, that I am not process oriented. And it's just not true. The fact that, when someone starts an organization, they do what works over and over again, and they repeat that. That is a process. When a customer smiles because you package their product a certain way, like you decide, I'm going to start doing more of that. That's a process. When you find a way to make more money over and over in the right way, like let's say you ship a product a certain way, that's your process. And maybe you didn't write it down, but I think that entrepreneurs are so naturally process oriented. They get what works and they get it really quickly. And they just don't realize like that is them creating the processes. It's just when you begin to scale, of course, you need to find a way to capture it and get what's in your head out so that other people can do the same thing. So that first myth of just I'm not process oriented, it's just not true. And frankly, even humankind is process oriented. As we mentioned in the book, when we decided to recreate fire, we had to find a way to do that, communicate it to other people. Like the survival of the species depends on us, communicating what is working and what's not working. So as a people, we're process oriented.
every business already has process. If they're doing what they're doing, if they're serving customers, they have process. Process already exists. Maybe they haven't captured it, like you said, but process exists in all of us every day.
Exactly. So that's the first myth. The second myth is the concern that process just takes too much time, that, we're too busy, our business is moving too quickly. It just takes too much time to document. And, the story I shared with you, well, first of all, I think people underestimate the amount of time that lack of process is costing them. When you are having to rebuild a product because it wasn't done the right way the first time, or rehire and hire for the same position because someone didn't get adequate training and so they keep leaving, or managers are leaving because they don't feel like being effective. The lack of process is what's costing you time. And the approach, and I think you and I want to talk about this in a little more detail, but rather than the approach that I took when I made the binder full of, super detailed processes, that was like, a 5-inch thick notebook. When you're trying to document 100% of your processes, following 100% of the steps to get you, and trying to get 100% compliance, and we call that the, 100 approach, that does take too much time. But our approach that we map out in the book is, a 20-80 approach, capturing 20% of the steps that'll get you 80% of the way there. High level, checklists and flow charts and screenshots that capture how it's done in an entrepreneurial company.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's this catch-22 about the idea that it takes so much time to build process. I don't have the time. It's not the urgent thing in my company, because of course that's the thing that really sets us free, right? If you can document a process, even a basic one, like you mentioned, high level process, you are giving someone else the key is the autonomy to be able to do that thing, so that you now have more time to focus on other parts of the business. And people, I think, may in the moment think this takes too much time. But if you zoom out and realize how much time you're spending repeating yourself or retraining people over and over, that's what you have to add up for the equation.
Exactly. And then the third myth that, some of the concerns reflect is this concern that process is going to destroy your freedom as an organization. And again, just exactly as you mentioned, what's killing your freedom is having to train and retrain the same employees or different employees in the same role, or answer the same questions over and over again. That's what's killing your freedom. Being called out when you're at home on the weekend to go help put out a fire at the office. Like, that's the stuff that crushes your soul as an entrepreneur and kills your passion. And that's frankly why we wrote this book, because you didn't start a business or, to live a life like that. You started a business to be free. And we want, first of all, so that you can capture processes, the repeatable stuff, and document it so that you don't have to be addressing that over and over again. And that you can have the freedom also, just then, if that's captured, you have the freedom then to innovate and think about what's the next step for this organization, or the next stage, or what does my organization look like, or what does my exit look like, whatever that approach is. That's what process. So that's why we say, how discipline and consistency can set you and your business free, because that's at the core why I'm so passionate about process.
So you mentioned the word innovation there. I was going to ask you, do you think process inhibits innovation in any way? Because a lot of people think if I've got to stick to the process, I can't innovate. So what do you say to that?
So when we talk about process, and I hope people hear this, we're talking about documenting the stuff you repeat over and over again. That will free your brain to then innovate, create, think about, and there's a great example. Atul Gawande wrote this amazing book, I'm sure you know, Checklist Manifesto. Yeah. I think that's the book that years ago even started me off on documenting as well.
Yeah.
And talks about the fact, these are high stake decisions that people are making in surgery, but in surgeries, people have checklists, right? And because they do, then of course the physicians and the nurses can then have the freedom to, make the decisions that they're risking, that their careers, the high stake decisions that their careers depend upon, because they don't have to think about the little details that are still super important. Because, if you don't wash hands and someone gets an infection, very small thing, but a very huge thing that's in a checklist because it's so impactful on outcomes. So, so I hope I answered your question. If you have your processes documented, then it just frees your brain to really create where it's needed.
Yeah, and I think where I would add on to that is once you download the processes from your brain to free up that capacity and somebody else is running with that process, that doesn't mean they can't improve the process. We
Exactly.
always want our people to be improving. And so I think that that's just part of building a culture that has innovation baked into the DNA. If everybody's constantly wanting to improve the process, improve it, experiment, test, and then rewrite, and then say, here's the new best practice. This is a new way we do it.
You made me think of a couple of things. One is, something as simple as, an HR process. We had a client, we had a person we interviewed for the book, a company we interviewed, and they talked about the fact that, they had their HR processes documented to the extent that then when a new employee was able to join, because all of the stuff that everyone needs, whether it's filling out forms and, all the onboarding stuff was captured, then as an organization, they were able to innovate in, making sure people's business cards were on time, or uniforms had their name on it, or, even, decorating their workspace with balloons and, sending a card to the home of the new employee saying, welcome, thanks for sharing this person with our team. Welcome to the family. That's the kind of, amazing experiences you can create when you have documented processes, because all the stuff that happens over and over again is captured. And now you can innovate in ways that really create an exceptional culture for your organization.
Yeah, well said. So you mentioned the 2080 approach, and that applies specifically to the level of detail that you're documenting, right, in a process. But when it comes to how much of my company should be documented, is there a guideline that you have for people? You said at the beginning when you made those dusty binders or whatever, you kind of went too far, right? So what's the right amount?
Right. So we're looking at, so the book talks about, and you meant, well, I'll come back to that in a minute. You spoke about everyone innovating and updating. And I want to come back to that and just park it and we'll come back to that in a minute. But the book talks about, there's 3 steps for documenting your processes. We teach our teams how to identify your core processes. There are a lot of processes in your organization, but we're going to start with identifying, 5 to 12 core processes in the organization. And as a leadership team, we explain how you decide on those, how you work together and identify those core processes. Then the second step is documenting and simplifying. So once you've identified that list, you use that list as a table of contents and you prioritize which process should we tackle first. And we really encourage our teams to just pick a handful or pick one. Like just get started, but don't try to do all 12 at once, because then you'll get none done. So pick a handful, prioritize, and document, yes, using the 2080 rule. So you don't have to necessarily like break out a calculator, but just the concept is, what are the major steps, 20% of the major steps that'll get you 80% of the way there, because they exist. You should end up with, 1, 2, or 3 pages of a document, of a process documented, not 20, 25, 30 pages. And particularly in an entrepreneurial company, you move and change so fast. And to your point, Chris, like things change. That's why having a high level documentation is so useful, because when you do update it, and then you can go on to train people, as we'll talk about later. So that's why, a 2080 approach, bullet points, checklists, you and the leadership team decide what that looks like. And then the third step of this first piece of it is packaging. You have to package it so people can both find it and so the end user can use it, like package it for the person that's going to be using it. So as a leadership team, you may have documented it in a Word document or with bullet points, but the person that's going to use it, what would be the best format? Would it be screenshots if you're teaching them software, or, would it be flow charts, or would it be photos? Or video. There's obviously so many options, or text. So that's why often I hear teams complain like this isn't happening or that, and that because all of those pieces are important to identify, document, and simplify and package in order to have your processes documented correctly.
So the 5 to 12 core processes, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm curious, in all the companies you've worked with, are there some that just keep popping up? Are there like low-hanging fruit processes? What would those be?
Yeah, absolutely. So think about processes that every organization has. And this is not meant to be like, this is what you need to do, but this is just to get the juices flowing, right? So every organization has a process for an HR process or a people process or talent, whatever you call it. There's a process around how you bring people into the organization. Every organization has a marketing process, how you generate demand. Every organization has a sales process, how you convert that demand into, revenue, or how you convert that demand into sales. And then every organization has, one or two operations processes. And that's, when you build the product or deliver the service. And then maybe there's other processes in operations. Most every organization has a finance process. Like there's maybe a customer service. I can go off the top of my head. Like those are a few, but those are some core processes for an organization. And that's a great place to start.
And core really is the right word, because when you start to think about those big departments, like how do we bring customers in? How do we do marketing? There's a start to finish core process there. Or how do we deliver our product or service? There's a very core process there. And so what I'm curious from you is, where does that bridge into really detailed training of like the specifics on how to do a process start to finish? So I'll use the people one as an example. If you've got a hiring process start to finish and you map out the bullets or the flow chart, and you've got, posting a job and doing it, an interview, and here's a few steps of the interview, and you send the offer letter and you add them to our system. When you hire that person, let's say that they're a recruiter, an in-house recruiter, how do you use that process to inform your training, or where do you go next?
In EOS, we help organizations strengthen 6 key components of their business. And it's like there's vision, people, data, and issues component, traction component, and the process component. And so the process component, each of those components has 2 tools. And whether or not you're a company running on EOS, there's 2 tools to strengthen each of those components. And so when it comes to process, the first tool is documenting and simplifying, which I just went through the 3 steps of identify, document, and simplify, and package. The second tool is getting those processes followed by all. And that's what you're speaking to. And that tool has 4 steps to it. So the first step is training. So in order to, it's all well and good, and it's, it still takes work to document your processes, but it's really of no value unless you're going to get it into the hands of your people. And so, so the first step is training. So the people that would be trained on the process you're talking about, the people process or HR process, would be the people involved in onboarding or hiring people. So anyone that touches that process is the person that should be trained. So not everyone gets trained on a process that is not something they're going to be using, right? So and you can train people in any manner you choose. It can be, on the job training, it could be during a weekly meeting, a special meeting designed for the training, whatever that looks like. But you would train the people who touch the process. I sometimes like to include or are impacted by the process. And maybe the process, the training looks different, but we had an example of a company who had a finance process, but everyone had involvement in like approving invoices and, every piece of the finance process. And so everyone needed to understand what they were being asked to do by finance and why, so they could help finance hit deadlines so that the organization could, hit its financial reporting deadlines and all of that. But at the end of the day, make sure you train those who are using the process. The second step of making sure you get your processes followed by all is to measure people. So add measurements to make sure that you're getting the results you want. At the end of the day, the reason you have processes documented is to get the results that you want and get consistency in them. And so we go into detail on how you can measure. It's not complicated, but we want to measure and make sure that we are seeing, are we getting the results with this process? And if we are, awesome. If we're not, what it takes us to the next step, which is the importance of managing people. So we as leaders have to step in the role of, if someone's not hitting, whether they're getting the results we need or getting the results we want, we have to manage them to it and identify, are there consequences for not getting these outcomes? Is there more training that's needed? What do we do to help support a person in and help or support the organization in getting the results that we need? So, and the final step of helping to get your processes followed by all is just the importance of updating, which is circling back to what you were talking about earlier, which is absolutely correct. Processes change, and so we want to make sure that we have a person identified as an owner for each process. And as they're hearing the need for maybe streamlining a process or there's new technology available to improve a process, we want to make sure that we're then updating the process and we go back around of redocument, then retrain, update measurements and all that. So it's just this continuous feedback loop that ensures that you as an organization stay competitive and that you're doing things in the most effective, efficient way possible.
Yeah. Well, the frameworks are in the book. And just to reiterate this, so the 3 steps at the beginning are: first, you identify your core processes, then you document and simplify them, and then you package them together. And then to make sure that they're followed by all, you're training people, whether it's shadowing or in person or whatever it is. You're measuring to make sure you get the results you want, managing our people, and then keeping the processes updated so they don't turn into that dusty binder. So I love how you covered these, and I think that those are great frameworks. So in the book, you mentioned a handful of tools, and I was very proud to have Trainual appear in the book a few times. I'm curious from your perspective, a lot of businesses, when they start doing this work, they could just use pencil and paper. They could just start mapping out these bullet points. When does it make sense to invest in some kind of software tool? Is there a certain size of company, or when do you think it makes sense?
I don't know if I know the answer as well as you do, Chris, but I do know that, there's times there's organizations that can use, Google Drive or, Vimeo. There comes a point when you want your processes accessible for all. And so there are tools like yours that make them more accessible for the teams. And you have a beautiful product, and that's awesome. I think at the end of the day, it's just super important for people to understand that, and I'm sure you encounter this yourself, that we can have awesome tools for our teams, but we still have to manage people to these processes, right? And I think even in speaking with you, we still have to document the processes. Trainual is not going to be able to do that for you. We still have to hold people accountable for getting the results, because I'm sure you've seen this where you have a great software, and we have to step in as leaders and make sure that they're using it to its utmost potential. Is that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the software will just continue to advance. And, we even have some things that start to record what you're doing in the browser. And someday we will be able to document for you. But until that happens, it really requires everyone's buy-in. And It requires the organization to be open about why we're doing this. Why is this important in the business? Why do we value this? And I think it's important for every person's growth to understand that, they're not just the one being trained, but it's also their responsibility to document what they're learning and what they're creating as they grow in the business.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely.
So the name of the podcast, of course, Organize Chaos. I'm curious, when you think about organizing chaos in business and in life, what comes to mind for you?
I think some of the stories we were talking about earlier, but the flip side of it too. I mean, the beauty of being an entrepreneur is it's an ever shift. The sands are ever shifting, right? And I think the more we can give our leaders the tools so that they can go back and realize why they started an organization, why they started whatever organization they started, to really get enjoy the fruits of their labors. And so I love the name of your podcast, and I love how process contributes to that, because people start out they launch their vision with great hopes, and along the way, because they keep getting pulled back into the details, that some of that energy dies. And having great processes in place, obviously great people in place to follow them. My hope is that once they use these really simple tools, they can realize their dream and the vision they had for the organization when they started it.
Awesome. I love that. Well, Lisa, where can people find the book? If they want to get process, how discipline and consistency will set you and your business free, where can they find the book? Where can they connect with you?
So the book is available everywhere where books are sold, like Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It is sold in a ridiculous amount, blew my mind. I'm already on the second and third run of printing. So, because it's just something that people need so much. And obviously people like you, Chris, just supporting us and getting the word out. I can be found on LinkedIn. I'm an EOS implementer, and I also run process workshops for companies running on EOS, and just have a kind of all day offsite where we help them document at least one full process and a map to do the rest. And so it's just a ton of fun right now, and I'm really excited to be on this journey with everyone.
Awesome. Well, Lisa González, thank you so much for being here. Of course, we both have this affinity and love for process, and it was fun to talk about your book. So congrats on the launch, and thanks again for coming on.
Absolutely. I think I see you next week. So thanks again for having me. You're the best.
Hey, thanks for listening to Organized Chaos. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with anyone in your network that you think could benefit from this information. For episode show notes, podcast recaps, and tons of other small business news and inspiration, check out the manual. That's trainual.com/manual.